When a is convicted, it always seems like the punishment is less severe than the crime. After all, there is something wildly disturbing about someone who preys on the innocent. Crimes of are so sickening that even some of the most deranged criminals in the penitentiary are horrified by these actions. You don't have to know the victim on a personal level to pray their family gets justice. In a lot of people's minds, time served in prison isn't enough. These monsters shouldn't be allowed back on the street. When it comes to the safety of children, people will go above and beyond, even if it means taking justice into their own hands. In today's video, we're going to talk about 5 who met their demise in jail. With these cases, other inmates did what the justice system could not. As we explore the stories in this video, we will be approaching some very sensitive topics. Viewer discretion is advised before moving forward with this video. Let's start off with a case that took nearly 18 years to solve. This one sends chills down our spines. Kirsten Hatfield was an 8-year-old girl from Midwest City, Oklahoma. On the evening of May 13, 1997, her mother Shannon tucked her into bed. At around 3 a.m., Shannon was woken up by a noise. It sounded like a whine, which she brushed off at the time because her youngest daughter Faith was a sleep talker. It wasn't uncommon for her to wake up to noises like this. But when she woke up in the morning, she immediately knew something was wrong. Both of her daughters slept with their bedroom doors open. On this morning, both girls' doors were closed. Faith was in her room, but Kirsten was missing. The first thing Shannon did was check door to door around the neighborhood, hoping the young girl went out to play and just didn't alert her. But there was no sighting of Kirsten. So she ran home and immediately called 911. Investigators arrived on the scene. They noticed that Kirsten's bedroom window was unlocked and they found some blood on the windowsill. As they searched the backyard, they discovered more blood on the fence and a pair of the young girl's underwear. This kidnapping shocked the entire community. Business owners handed over security footage from outside their shops. Missing person signs were posted all around the town, and the local community conducted several search parties. But there was one major problem. There were no leads to trace. The only thing they could go on was that the blood on the fence didn't belong to Kirsten. They just had to work on their suspect list to find out who the blood belonged to. The family's hope eventually faded, as it seemed like the search for what happened to Kirsten was never going to come to an end. But in 2015, investigators were about to make a move that could shed light on the situation. Now, why the investigators decided to pay a visit to Anthony Palma's house that day in 2015 isn't public information, but it was a huge break in the case. Anthony lived 2 doors down from Kirsten and stayed in that very same house over the years. He was interviewed like everyone else in the neighborhood back in 1997, but nothing seemed suspicious. Several years later, he met a woman and got married. When investigators showed up that day, she mentioned that Anthony had always been sensitive when it came to talking about the case. She just believed that it was because he lived so close to the family. But that piece of information didn't sit right with the investigators. So they conducted a DNA swab test on Anthony, who was an exact match with the blood found on the fence that night. Anthony was arrested, bringing a sense of justice to the family. However, there was one key problem. They still didn't know where her body was, and unfortunately, this will remain a mystery. Officials were in the works of their plan to further investigate Anthony, as it seemed like there would be a sliver of moral conscience in him that would push him to tell the truth. But you see, Anthony's cellmate was a convicted murderer. Even murderers despised. In 2019, authorities found him dead from ligature strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. However, since nobody witnessed this crime, authorities can only believe that his cellmate could be responsible. Unfortunately for Kirsten's family, this case will not be closed. However, Shannon made a public statement in which she sent prayers to Anthony's family and loved ones. The next story in our video is John Geoghan, a priest who was convicted of being a serial child predator. His career as a priest spanned over 30 years, where he is believed to have over 150 victims. To make this story even more horrifying, people believe that higher-ups in the church knew about his abuse, but turned a blind eye. Sending this priest to prison was a whole other mission. He was first prosecuted in 1991. In 1998, he was finally defrocked from clergy, but it wasn't until 2002 that he was finally sentenced to prison. This disturbed priest was sent to Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center, where he was put in a protective custody unit with 23 other inmates. One of those inmates plays a very important role in this story. His name is Joseph Druce, and he was convicted of murder in 1988. Although details are bleak, it is alleged that he was sexually abused in the past. This is why he took such an extreme reaction to sexual abusers. He was originally sentenced to prison after he killed George Rollo, a man who picked him up hitchhiking and allegedly made an unwanted sexual advance at him. By August 2003, the prison had faced serious labor cutbacks. This alone made the prison a more dangerous place than it already was. Typically, there would be 2 guards monitoring the unit where these prisoners were kept, but at this point, there was only 1 guard on duty to supervise 23 dangerous criminals. One fateful day that August, Joseph Druce found his opportunity. He made his way into John's cell and jammed the door shut. From here, he was able to launch his brutal attack on the predator. We won't get into the details of the attack because it's very gory. But the autopsy report showed that the pedophile priest died from ligature strangulation and blunt force trauma to the chest. A few theories have led up to this attack. Some people believe that Joseph Druce was paid money to kill the priest. Others say that he believed this attack would gain him prestige from other prisoners. But it's also likely that his own personal experiences and trauma motivated him to take out this monster. Our next story brings us to Stony Mountain, a prison in Manitoba, Canada. A 53-year-old inmate named Dwayne Edward Taylor was serving a life sentence for the murder of a 2-year-old girl that he killed in 1981. There are many disturbing details of this crime, but what sets us off the most was the fact that this sicko was previously arrested for molesting a child and murdered his next victim only 11 days after being released. If he had been kept behind bars and made to seek psychiatric help, this murder could have been prevented. So when he harmed another child and took the poor girl's life, it was no surprise that people wanted to take justice into their own hands. The legal system already failed them once with this guy. Dwayne Taylor began his life sentence in 1982, but it wasn't until August 16, 2014 when he met his fate. Now, the details of how this attack went down haven't been made public, but what we do know is that a 25-year-old inmate named Cordell Charles launched the attack. He stabbed the child killer in the back of the neck and proceeded to choke him to death. In 2017, Cordell Charles was brought to trial for this crime and convicted of first-degree murder. The prison made no changes to its procedures after this killing. While the prison claims to take all homicides seriously, could it be that deep down they thought justice was finally served in this case? Now on to one of the most disgusting people in this video, Arthur Goode. Despite having the last name Goode, this man was purely evil. He was convicted in 1976 for the kidnapping, assault, and murder of 2 young boys. But this disgusting man had been in trouble with the law prior to the 1976 conviction for molestation. In 1975, he was arrested, but his parents covered the $25,000 bail under the condition that he seek psychiatric treatment. No amount of therapy was enough to stop this predator. Once he was put in prison, he became the most hated man on death row. He was constantly taunted by other inmates. Even though he was in the same prison as notorious serial killer and rapist Ted Bundy, he was the one that disgusted the other inmates the most. They made games out of harassing him behind bars. Ted Bundy would often steal food from his tray, and other inmates would throw things at him when he passed by. Of course, we can't blame them for being disgusted by this pedophile and child killer, especially when we discovered that leading up to his arrest, he would write cruel letters and taunt the families of his victims. That just makes his crimes more disturbing. Now, Arthur Goode did meet his fate behind bars. While plenty of inmates at the time would have been thrilled to be the one to take this pedophile out, this time, the justice system took matters into their own hands. They were going to make sure this sicko would never be on the streets again. On April 5, 1984, he was sentenced to death by the electric chair. Before his death, he was quoted saying, "I have remorse for the 2 boys I murdered, but it's hard for me to show it." But this wasn't enough to make up for other disturbing things he said, like during his trial when he said, "If I ever get my hands on another little boy, especially a sexy boy, he will never make it home again." The levels of this criminal keep getting more disturbing. He was convinced he did nothing wrong and was only arrested because society is prejudiced against pedophiles. He even claimed that he had to kill the kids to get society's attention. When he was behind bars, he would write letters to elementary schools trying to arrange for child pen pals to write to him. He also developed an unhealthy obsession with a child actor named Ricky Schroeder. His last request before his death was to have the young actor sit on his lap. Of course, this was one death row request that was rightfully denied. If you thought the last pedophile we talked about was disturbing, wait until you hear about Richard Huckle. He's been named as Britain's worst pedophile. This sicko met a very brutal fate, but once you hear about the crimes he committed, you might think justice was finally served. Richard was a quiet man who was a bit of a loner. In university, he had friends, but they noted that he often kept to himself. He went through school to pursue education and always talked about his love of traveling. When he made the decision to travel abroad and teach English as a second language to kids in foreign countries, people didn't think twice about his motives. After all, Education and traveling were believed to be two of his biggest passions, but this teacher had ulterior motives for his actions. This teacher would travel to countries with high poverty rates and take advantage of the children. It's believed that he had over 200 victims, young boys and girls. His youngest victim was a 6-month-old baby. He went on to explain that he preferred taking advantage of children in poverty because they were easy to seduce. He would give them hopes of a better life to gain their trust, then completely take advantage of them. This is disturbing enough, but it gets so much worse. Since teaching is a passion of his, he wanted to teach other pedophiles. He would take explicit photos of his victims and sell them to other perverts. He even wrote a guide called Pedophiles and Poverty, Child Lover Guide. His crimes were so sickening that his own parents begged the justice system to lock him away for life after he drunkenly confessed his wrongdoings to them. He was served with 22 life sentences, but people feared that wasn't enough. Any sentence that gave leeway to him being on the streets again in this lifetime was too light. Plenty of the inmates were disgusted to have this pedophile in the same unit as them. One inmate, Paul Fitzgerald, took matters into his own hands. He wanted to get poetic justice on the teacher in the most brutal way. Paul Fitzgerald was an inmate with severe psychological issues. He provoked an attack on Richard Huckle that lasted approximately 75 minutes. During this attack, he raped, strangled, and beat the pedophile. It was even reported that Paul said he wanted to cook and eat parts of Richard's body. We wouldn't wish this attack on our worst enemies, especially since Paul Fitzgerald admitted that the attack went on for a long time because he was having fun with it. As we delved into these cases, it left a sickening feeling in our stomachs. There's nothing more disgusting than preying on an innocent child. While most people get disturbed when they hear about a murder, these cases can give a sense of poetic justice. When a killer gets killed, it guarantees that they won't be able to harm anyone else again. People like John Geoghan and Richard Huckle should never be given the chance to be free on the streets again. They used their power and influence to take advantage of the most vulnerable victims they could lay their hands on. Do you believe justice was served in these cases? Let us know what you think. We want to hear your opinions in the comments below. We also want to thank you for sticking with us to the end of our video, especially as we explored such an unsettling topic. But ultimately, each sinister monster we covered today met their fate. If you liked this video, we have more in the works for you. Make sure you hit like, share, and subscribe to see more.